Good morning, Professor Salman, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us from several colleges and universities of India, dear excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, from listening us from social media live, Facebook and YouTube. This is Rudra Narayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, welcomes you all to this global digital platform of intellectual gathering. The name of our conference is World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021, organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, in association with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, and Ravenshaw University, Kotak. The broader theme of this conference is agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social science, and policy fields. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Naik, respected Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, and Professor Sharat Kumar Palita, respected Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha. The convener of this largest virtual conference, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudhat Panigrahi. Friends, in this evening, we have with us Professor Jami Imo Sherman. He's a very dynamic speaker, orator, joining us from California, United States. Professor Dr. Sherman's PhD describes himself as a kernel of grave sciences researcher and writer, researching everything from the origin of life to our grave situation today. For a quarter country, he has been collaborating closely with Harvard, Berkeley, and a neuroscientist, biological anthropologist, parents taken developing an explanation for the emergence of slaves and interpretation and effort from chemistry. He is the author of Neither Ghost Nor Mason, the emergence and nature of slaves, Columbia University Press, and a new book related to agnotology, Persev with assholes, how to spot them without becoming one. And his book is called self-published in November 2021. He has written over 1,000 blog articles for psychology, today and everyday decision making. His PhD is in evolutionary epistemology and a master in public policy. So welcome you, sir, for joining us in World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021. Professor Sherman will deliver his talk on a natural history of agnotology from kernel, that means origin of life, to our grave situation. So in this program, we have with us Professor Dr. B.C. Das, the education professor from Ravenshaw University, will conduct the webinar with us, and several dignitaries from different universities of Odisha, India, and abroad. So without taking much time, I would like to invite Dr. Sherman to initiate his talk. Over to you, Dr. Sherman.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Is the microphone working?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. So I will share a slide presentation. Let me just put this on the screen.
Please go on.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just looking for how to do this. This should work any second now. Share. Play slideshow. And then I'm looking for the control on, oh, let's see, share screen. Here we go. Okay. Did that come through? do you see a slide that says a natural history of agnotology? Great,
Please.
thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be with you. I have only been as close to your place as Delhi. I've been to Delhi twice. I studied tabla for 5 years. I wanted to become a tabla player. I love Indian music. But I don't know your culture that well, and I don't know the context for this that well. This is some of my own agnotology. So I hope that what I present today is relevant to your work. I woke up this morning thinking that some of what I'm going to say might be very obvious to you. I don't have a problem with stating the obvious. I'm more interested in what's accurate than what's new. I'm trying to figure out, well, I'll give some description of what I'll explain myself in context. The first point I want to make, or the question I want to pose for this presentation, is two possible contexts for agnotology. And I will distinguish them by these two terms, one of which is obvious, brainwashing, and the other one is something that I have coined for my purposes here. One context for agnotology is that decent people just want to know what's true, but they can be brainwashed into ignorance by large profit-seeking institutions. People know that the truth will set them free, but institutions don't want us to be free. So this is one possible implied context for agnotology. The second one is that people have always been ambivalent about the truth. We chase the truth, but we hope it never catches us. We're an anxious, denialist species that invites brain laundering, easy ways to wash away doubt and bad news by not thinking, or by thinking simplistic, happy thoughts. Now, in this presentation, I will provide context for how I think about these two possibilities. And I can also say in my own life, I started out with the first position and I ended up with the second, not just through personal experience, but also from this work that I've been part of for the last 25 years. So let's see if I can get slides to move. Oh, look at that. I've enjoyed a 25-year close collaboration with this researcher, the Harvard Berkeley neuroscientist, biological anthropologist, Terence Deacon. When I had met him back in 1996, he had just completed writing a book that was the product of a 20-year project. The book is called The Symbolic Species, and it is an attempt to explain in neurological and evolutionary terms how humans developed a capacity for language, language being a very different kind of sign system from icons and indexes, from resemblance or association, which are the kinds of signs that other organisms deal with. Obviously, we deal with them too, but we have this added capacity to use language. So I met him after having read that book, and we became collaborators primarily on this project, which is presented in his second book called Incomplete Nature: How Mind Emerged from Matter. That title is not exactly accurate. He is actually he was trying, when I first met him, and throughout our time together, we've been trying to explain the emergence of the struggle for existence from chemistry. I'll say more about that. This is what I describe as my cradle to grave research. So these first three questions are ones that have been very important to Terence's work. This last question is my question, but it's also grounded in this other work. So heliogenesis is explaining the chemical emergence and nature of selves struggling for their own existence. That is, nothing in chemistry, nothing inanimate is trying to achieve anything. Chemicals aren't trying to achieve anything. Computers aren't trying to achieve anything, but organisms, all organisms are trying to achieve something. So I'll say more about that. Symbiogenesis is explaining how collectives evolve. That's the product, that's the focus of Terence Deacon's current book, a book he's writing. But logogenesis, explaining the evolution and language of humans and nature of human symbolic competence, that was the subject of his book, The Symbolic Species. And this last word I came up with yesterday. I mean, it's just, I try to explain the evolution and nature of what has come to be called in folk psychology assholes. I don't like the word. I come up with a better word throughout the process of a book I've just written on the subject. But it is the current term of art in folk psychology. And and surprisingly, it doesn't get much exploration by intellectuals. We talk about psychopaths, we talk about sociopaths, we talk about narcissists and gaslighters, but we don't talk about what I consider to be a broader category of behavior, which is being an asshole. So let's see. Now the slides don't seem to be moving. Oh, there we go. So I have 3 books. This was one I wrote about doubt quite a while ago. Then the book with Columbia University Press that presents Terence and I's work on the origins of selves and the struggle for existence. And then this is my new book, which will be out in a few weeks, but it's already available. So my approach to all questions in the social sciences is based on something that I call Originism, which I learned by working with Terence, or Terry is what I normally call him. To understand something, explain its ergodynamic emergence from what precedes it. So to understand organisms, we have to explain them from chemistry. The assumption here is that the prior sciences must explain what subsequent sciences assume. I do not consider this a multidisciplinary approach. I consider it a sequidisciplinary approach. That is, we recognize in the sciences that some phenomena precedes other phenomena. For example, that physics precedes chemistry, that precedes biology, which precedes psychology and all of that. And so Originism is the attempt to explain anything I want to understand. I have to understand how it emerged. I can't simply declare that it emerged from what preceded it. And what do I mean by the word ergodynamic? Well, dynamic means change and ergo means work. So I have to explain how the likely physical work changes such that you would have, for example, organisms struggling for their own existence. So struggling for existence is effort or trying, and trying is a kind of physical work, but it's a kind of physical work that is different from the physical work that we see, for example, in chemistry. So one of the things we have to recognize in trying to understand selves, so I will be getting to agnotology, but starting with what selves are and what they're trying to do. But the challenge that has been to some extent ignored or avoided within the sciences is this: nothing we do, nothing we living beings do defies physical law, and nothing was added to us to make us come alive. So organisms and their effort are something different from nothing but chemistry. And the question we have to deal with is what? So if we go back to the title of my Columbia book, Neither Ghost Nor Machine, I'm saying nothing we do defies physical law. So in that respect, we are like machines, or we're like chemical mechanism. And nothing was added to make us come alive. That is, there's no ghost or spirit that was added to us. It's fine to believe in those things, but I think of science as a campaign to find natural explanations for all natural phenomena. It's a campaign to do that. And therefore, we do not get to bring in the idea of a supernatural force that was introduced into matter to explain how that matter began to try to stay alive, try to keep going. So let's see if I can get this to move again. Oh, okay. So I'll still be getting to agnotology. I'm starting way back at the origins of life. But here's the first trying that we assume in our research must occur. It's the difference between existence and being in philosophy, or I would say between durables and indurables. Everything degenerates. This is the second law of thermodynamics. It's considered the most fundamental property in our universe, which is that segregations, if unconstrained, will desegregate. Order will become disordered. Everything degenerates. All order degenerates. Durable things degenerate slowly. Organisms are not durable. We know this by observing what happens after a body dies. It degenerates quite rapidly. It's not like a rock or a computer. We have to keep being beings. The word being is very interesting. It's a verb about a noun state. That is, to remain beings, we have to keep up an activity. It takes active work. That's the struggle for existence. On our even laziest day, we still manage to regenerate 240 billion replacement cells. This is going on below the level of consciousness and cognition, and yet it's going on actively. It's the most fundamental aspect of what organisms have to do. They have to regenerate themselves faster than they would otherwise degenerate. That is the first effort. That is the first struggle for existence. And in our work, we have a chemical model for how that would begin. But since this is a presentation on agnotology, we won't get into that. I have videos about it, and obviously I have books and articles about it. But to struggle for our existence, we have two fundamental activities. We have to protect ourselves against degeneration and regenerate what degenerates. That is, you could say that it's a lot like what we do in our practical lives. We have to protect against degeneration. We have roofs over our head and clothes and all sorts of protection that would keep us from degenerating. And a lot of our work, a lot of our effort goes into regenerating what degenerates, including those 240 billion replacement cells. But for example, any healing that we have to do, any time we have a wound, our bodies repair that wound. So I'm going to argue that self-repair is more fundamental than self-replication. And this is often ignored in the sciences, where in biology, for example, where we assume that replication, once you have chemical systems that are replicating, or even chemical models, even molecules, like once you have RNA that is replicating, that would be the origins of life. We're saying, no, life has to actually regenerate what degenerates. It's not simply a matter of copying molecules. There are all sorts of chain reactions that are not alive. Those are molecules being copied. So we're saying self-repair is more fundamental. So this is a challenge, and I'll show you very quickly how this relates to agnotology. I'll call it the energy paradox, and I'll suggest the way that organisms have dealt with it. To self-regenerate, we have to take in energy. It takes energy to do the effortful work of regenerating ourselves, for example, to generate those 240 billion new cells. But energy is just what degenerates us. That is, if you observe what happens when energy passes through a system, it will tend to corrode the system. We have to have durable pipes and durable insulation on our wires because energy is just what degenerates such containment. So how do we deal with this? Through what I'll call selective interaction. To survive, we absorb the energy we can use for self-regeneration, and we block the energy that degenerates us. To the extent we can, we are all engaged in selective interaction, trying to take in the energy that helps and not the energy that harms. So for example, we eat food and not poison. Remember that Terence's first work was on explaining language and how different it is from other sign systems. So we both work in a field called biosemiotics, which is trying to understand how interpretation or interaction with signs occurs throughout biological systems. But we do this with a special attention to how humans use symbols. So what do you get when you apply the concept of selective interaction in the realm of language, of symbols? You get confirmation bias. We absorb the ideas we can use to self-motivate us and block the ideas that self-demotivate. For example, we will pore over fan mail and speed read hate mail. And this, I think, is just a fundamental answer to this question I posted here. What do you get when you cross emotions with words? Most of what you get are words that rationalize the emotions. One can work very carefully to try to overcome that. Bertrand Russell described philosophy as a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. I think peculiar is the point here. That is, it takes extraordinary effort to try to think clearly. The default state is towards confirmation bias. And I think that decent, normal, the original meaning of decent was well-suited or adaptive. Decent humans treat confirmation bias as a human condition they have to manage in themselves. And in my work on what I call psychoproctology, assholes treat confirmation bias as the solution to all of their problems. That is, whenever they meet a challenge, they will engage in active brain laundering. They will engage in agnotological practices. They will avoid all problems. Now, I think we all avoid problems, even if they're real problems. But I think that it is possible for someone to become completely committed to treating confirmation bias as the solution to all of their problems. They may not do it full time. They could do it part-time. They could do it in their corporate lives. We have the term psychopath, but I have also coined the concept of the econopath. An econopath is someone who is basically a psychopath for hire, or became a psychopath because they are paid to be a psychopath. So agnotology at the origins of life, there's another fundamental piece of this I'd like to get at. In information science, it is popular to describe information as a difference that makes a difference. I would say that that's a okay, clever first approach to it, but I know noted biologists who think that that's enough of an explanation, which doesn't really distinguish a billiard ball knocking into a billiard ball. There is a difference in position of one ball making a difference in position of another. That is not information. It can become information to someone, for example, playing a game of billiards, but it is not itself information. The entire universe is differences that make a difference. We could call that all potential information. It's only information once it is interpreted by a self as about something for that self's benefit. So I often say a stop sign does not cause you to stop unless you crash into it. You stop at a stop sign because you are interpreting it as about something for your own well-being or survival. So interpretation is different from cause and effect. I would describe interpretation as a distinction that yields a different response, a different living response that results in a difference to one's self-regeneration. But I would also say, based on our origins of life approach and our chemical model for it, that a failure to distinguish is the ground of interpretation. It's called abduction. It's called iconicity. It's basically analogy drawing between one thing and another thing. But it it starts as a passive indifference to differences. So camouflage itself, when you think about camouflage, it is iconic of its background. But you'll notice that with camouflage, you do not look at camouflage and say, oh, wow, that sure looks like it's like the background. You simply don't notice differences. I'm saying that life and interpretation starts from indifference, and differences have to evolve from that. The ability to notice differences that make responsive differences that make a difference to one's survival. So I want to say we don't start out. There are many fall from grace myths where some enlightened being or we lived in a Garden of Eden and we fell from grace. That is, we have become ignorant. I want to state the obvious, which is that we didn't. We started with ignorance. Everything we have to cultivate. It takes extraordinary work to cultivate anything like knowledge. We didn't fall from grace, we rose from slime. Occasionally when I have a new idea, I coin a term for it and I write a limerick, because limericks are the shortest form that I can find for conveying an idea. I'm part-time in research and I'm part-time in promoting ideas, and sometimes a clever way to promote an idea, a meme or its kind, is both useful for me because it becomes part of my, you could say, my intellectual journal, my commonplace book, as they were called in the 1800s. But it also is a way to promote a concept. So cogito ergo summarize. I think, therefore I must shrink. Every thought or it goes down the sink. I need short, sweet, and sassy, confirming and classy, synced to thoughts that I already think. That's an agnotological limerick. I coined this one the other day for one of the challenges, one of the reasons why we have a grave situation. The growing Malthusian agnotology gap is that rhetoric expands exponentially. Once humans have stumbled on a way to trick minds into serving these people, these propagandists, that trick will spread and be used from then on. That is, once we discover such a trick, it will be used from then on, and it will proliferate and be used by very different causes because it's just a tool, just a rhetorical trick. Whereas critical thinking expands arithmetically. Propagandists just in it to win it. Don't forget any trick way to spin it. The tricks propagate at an exponent's rate, but a sucker is born every minute. That was last week. Like I say, when I have an idea, this is a way of, you could say, galvanizing it in my own mind, is to write it up as a limerick. My concern, therefore, and I'm guessing it's also your concern, is that we might enter what I'll call a dissociation or a delusional death spiral. As reality gets more complicated and challenging, people escape into fantasy. That is, they engage in more confirmation bias, thus neglecting reality more, prompting still more escape into fantasy. The instinct to inquire or learn is strong, but the instinct to avoid doubt is stronger. This is a modification on something that I read by in a book by Stephen Cull, who was a psychological researcher who was studying nuclear planners. And he wrote at the end of his book that the instinct to survive is strong. The instinct to alleviate fear is stronger. And I found that very sobering. I read that probably back in the 80s, and it stuck with me. Now, I also think that we all need fiction. We all need to be able to escape. I do not think humans could be entirely realistic. I think we couldn't possibly stand it. I think that the real challenge for humans is that we can imagine all sorts of possibilities, real and unreal, direct and indirect threats and opportunities, that human life is intrinsically harrowing or anxious. When you consider what you could worry about as you try to go to sleep, to what a dog could worry about, it's just overwhelming, the possible things to worry about for humans. So I do believe we need fiction and nonfiction, fiction for what I'll call ventertainment therapy, nonfiction for negotiating our survival in the real world. If we could all just get straight on which is which, we could have both. But some say, where's the fun in that? That is, this is just an agnotological comment that came to me last week. I do think that it's important that we get good at lying to ourselves in ways that help but don't harm. I call it optimal illusion, kidding ourselves where it helps rather than where it harms. You know what, I think I got to the ends of, these are slides that belonged at the end of my presentation. Let me see. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, okay. This is another one that came to me this week. I'll pass over these for right now. So I want to talk about the techniques by which we can treat confirmation bias as the solution to all our problems. The ways in which it becomes tempting to become what I'm calling an asshole, but it's basically a very avid fan of not knowing. Someone who actively doesn't want to know, though in a passive way. That is, they aren't aware that they don't want to know, but they are very actively in that business. So I have called it the wild card trump card formula. So when you think about what an organism would want, it would want perfect freedom to self-assert. That is, we are struggling against an environment that would naturally degenerate us. We want to be able to do our effort, to make our effort in our struggle for existence. So we would want what you could call freedom, and we would want safety, safe self-assertion, what every organism would want. And we want freedom to have greater advantages. We talk about whether we want free will or determinism. I'd say we want both. We want freedom to rise, but safety to prevent ourselves from falling. So the ideal state for an organism, and it's a state that can be imagined through the power of language, which basically enables us to live in two worlds, the real world that all organisms live in, and the world of our imaginations. Because of language, the ideal state would be, I can do anything. That's the wild card or the joker. And whatever I do is unassailable. That's the trump card. So what we would really want, any organism would want this, would be this wild card, trump card formula. I call it in my book bullshit dozing. So bulldozing is plowing through anything that gets in our way. And you can do it by means of bullshit. And bullshit is by now, it's actually a technical term in philosophy. Harry Frankfurt wrote a book called On Bullshit. And his point about bullshit was that it was distinct from lying. Lying is knowing that you're not telling the truth. Bullshitting is not caring what's true. And I want to argue from what I said before about how indistinction, like camouflage, is the ground state, that bullshitting is also the ground state. We don't actually want to notice all the differences, and there are certainly advantages to not noticing the difference between truth and untruth. So if I chance upon words, and this would be true of anybody, if a person chances upon words and gestures, perhaps learn from watching other people use them, words and gestures that get them what they want, they won't forget them. Those words will become a habit. That is, if anytime you find a trick that gets you what you want, you can use that trick, you'll likely use that trick, and you can bypass meaning completely. So this is a phenomenon that we're seeing a lot in the United States right now from the Trump supporters. They are actually not paying attention to what words mean, because why would they bother? The words achieve their effect without knowing about it. In fact, it's a disadvantage for them to notice what the words mean. So here's some more about how that would go. So I want to say that it's a form of playing God. To pretend that you are perfectly safe and free is like playing God, because God is perfectly safe and free. He's omnipotent, and everything he does, he's omnificent, which means everything he does is unassailable. He's perfectly right, righteous, and mighty. That's what playing God would mean. And it's far easier than being human. All you have to do is master a simple and generic bag of rhetorical tricks for two processes. One is spin dominance, which is that my spin wins, and the other is frame dominance, which is I decide which spin wins. And for that, I've coined the term trumpiring, which is you trump by playing. Trump means to beat everything. You trump by playing the umpire in any debate that you enter. So I decide which spins wins, and of course it will be mine. So here's a little bit more about spin dominance. You embrace a popular, positively spun moral term against a negatively spun moral term. So right now in the United States, patriot is considered perfectly good and traitor is considered perfectly bad. Christian versus godless, communist versus capitalist. It could be any two words. Assume that having embraced one, so you say patriotism is good, and then you assume that anyone who is attacking you is the negative attacking the positive. So if you disagree with me, you're automatically a traitor attacking patriotism. There's no need to think about what these terms mean. It's that simple. And you, in the process, you humble yourself before the positive and you can lord it over everyone. You can pretend. So we get this in the United States, which is my cultural background. We are seeing a lot of this right now. Christians are not paying attention to what Christianity means anymore. They just know that it's good and that they are Christians, which means they're good, which means anyone who attacks them is automatically attacking Christianity. And that means that they are godless or heathen or communist. It's just name calling without paying any attention to what the words mean. That is spin dominance. And it plays into something. I can see I'm running out of time here, so I want to make sure to get to some things here. I think I'll skip this one for now. It will be available if anybody wants to find out more about it. But here are some videos I've made about these things. Here's a short video I made about spin dominance, and then I'll do a video about frame dominance. Oh, I'm hoping the sound comes through. This is interesting. 1 second. This may be a... Can someone tell me whether the sound is coming through? That makes no sense to play this if it doesn't. Can you hear me? Can you hear
but the sound of the video is not coming, sir.
Oh, well, that makes a big difference. Okay, so hold on 1 second. Keynote. Okay, I'll share it another way. I will get out of the slide presentation. Let's see if I should do this. 1 second. Shoot. Yeah, this is probably a waste of time. What I can do is send links to these videos. That's probably the best thing to do, unless I can figure out. Well, let me take one quick look here. Share, preferences. Yes, it's interesting. Preferences are not. Okay, I give it up. I will move on from this slide. Yes. Interesting. Now I'm having trouble moving the slides for, okay. I have a few videos on here. It's just as well that I don't play them right now. They're about 4 minutes long, but they do describe the process. A frame dominance is posing as a judge, adjudicating others who enter debates. Here's another video about that, but I will skip right over it. I will send them and you can watch them if they're of interest to you. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's the last one I was going to play. These are so I'll explain this one because it relates to psychoproctology, to agnotology. So I'll just voice through this. The current term of art that gets us closest to understanding assholes in psychology these days, in clinical diagnostic psychology, is the dark triad. The dark triad is narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Some people are calling it the dark quadrant, which adds in sadism. I'm very interested in what I'd call sado-narcissism, but it's treated as a rubric. You've got 3 diagnostic terms, and if you click off all of these terms, you will end up with a dark triad personality. That's how that's regarded. Being an originist, that is, being interested in how to explain the emergence of traits, not just simply describe them, but explain how they would emerge, I would argue that the dark triad is actually exactly what you would get from organisms that want to maximize their capacity for self-assertion and maximize their safety. That is, maximizing freedom and safety is what you would get in these traits. And that the way you would get them is actually by playing God, and that gods, at least the Western gods, the Abrahamic gods, are really not just created in human image, but in an asshole's image. And I just think that's an accurate statement. God is perfectly right, righteous, and mighty. And if you could ask how he could have all of those capacities, for example, could a God create a mountain so big he can't move it? An old question. There's a 4th quality that is assumed about the God, which is that he has unity. God is one. This is something that Hinduism has avoided, but through a polytheistic approach. But the religions that have taken have become the most popular have a unitary God who does not contradict himself. So I want to argue that actually the dark triad is a shell game where you basically, let me see if I can get back to the cover of this. I'll get down here to where it is. Let's see, is this good? Here we go. Since I'm a god, I should win. That's narcissism. I'm omnipotent, all good, so I must win. To win, I should sin. That's psychopathy. Since I'm omnipotent, I'm all powerful, therefore ruthless. And I'm a god since I win. This is, I'm omniscient, all knowing, proving I'm God. So this is something that I think would be very active in high-level organizations that are engaging in the practices that you study in agnotology. This doesn't make it clear, but the entire video does, and I will send a copy of it, and we can go from there. So I come back to this question, 2 possible contexts for agnotology. The first one is, in effect, a way to feel heroic. I think of it as a bit of a myth, that it's a lot like Plato's cave. That is, decent people like me just want to know what's true, and we've been brainwashed into ignorance, and we can escape Plato's cave and come out and see the light, and we see these villainous forces that are trying to keep us from seeing the truth, even though we want the truth. I guess I would engage in that as a kind of fiction myself. I'm trying to free the world. I'm trying to teach the truth to all people, and they just want to be educated. I don't think that it's actually a true story. I think I end up quite convinced through my research and thinking about what organisms want from the very ground at the origins of life. We are very ambivalent about the truth. We chase it, but we hope it never catches us. We are engaged in brain laundering. We are very receptive to ways to keep the discouraging or challenging truths from being things we have to deal with. I think that the truth will set us free is true in the long term, but in the short term, the truth is often extremely disappointing because it's a constraint. It means that we are constrained in our freedom and that we're not safe if we ignore it, and we're not safe if we attend to it. So I end up favoring that latter position and just wanted to bring that idea, or at least these two options, to the table. The instinct to learn is strong. The instinct to avoid doubt is stronger. And this is something I came up with back in the 90s. Inquiry dies when leaders so powerful they don't have to doubt lead people so anxious they can't afford to doubt. And that's the beginning of a dissociation death spiral. Let's see. I think I can stop here because I want to make time for questions or comments. So thank you for your attention during this, and I'm happy to discuss whatever.
Thank you so much, Professor, for a wonderful and thought-provoking deliberation on agnotology. And now I would like to invite Dr. B.C. Das for a quick remark on Professor Sherman's talk. Dr. B.C. Das.
Welcome and namaskar to Professor Jeremy for his valuable talk on that is the nature of agrontology. Really, for a long period of time, we have been put in the realm of agrontology, and I mean ignorance, ignoring a part of our knowledge system, or we have been preyed by brainwashing or brain laundering by our contemporary thought leaders, or the power game played by the leaders, or the social leaders, those who are resorting to propaganda and other things, as they think themselves as the social reformers or the thought leaders. So I think it is very dangerous moment when we are going through a period of Anthropocene, when we have been to think over the relation. We are ignoring the relation between human and non-human entities. We are harming a lot to our environment and the relationship between human and non-human entities. So this is a grave situation, and this is the high time to think over this. And esteemed thought leader Professor Jeremy has sparked upon a bunch of thoughts relating to freedom versus ignorance, or ignorance versus enlightenment, or ignorance versus propaganda. And he's also advocating the instinct to inquire, or instinct to avoid ignorance. So these aspects have not been facilitated by our power gamers when we need self-assertion or safety to prevent falling. So we need a thought support by the leaders like you in this society to transmit or to to wipe out the ignorance from the human being. Uh, so this is a very good talk, sir. I would invite your attention to some of the questions asked in the chat box by, I think I must start with uh, the card director. I am very much grateful to the director of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Dr. Bikram Jena. He asked, I think this question need to be asked by Dr. Bikram Jena, sir. Then I am coming to next question by Shubham Das. He asks, sir, how do you look at the problem that what keeps ignorance alive or allows it to be used as the biggest political instrument to keep subjects in illusion? How do you consider the statement? What don't we know, and why don't we know it, and its solution accordingly? So this is the question for you. You may see from the
Yes,
chat.
I see these questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so the theme of my talk is that ignorance is the default state for organisms. We learn what we need to get by. And so this is why I'm drawing attention to the market for disinformation. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because we in the United States are attempting to address the problem with disinformation through fact-checking. But I also recognize that many in the United States, that there are people who want to know what's true, but there is now roughly 40% of our population would not trust a fact checker. Why? Because it feels more fun to pretend that they are doing their own research. So for example, we have a president who, we just had a president who lied 10,000 times at least on record, and yet none of that makes a difference to his supporters who believe that fact checkers are fake news. So what I'm trying to point out is that we have to pay attention to the individual's demand for ignorance. It's not just ignorance imposed upon them or perpetrated. There is certainly brainwashing, and there is certainly high-level corporate lying. You know, my first whole career was in working on climate change. I started a national lobbying organization with 75 chapters back in the 1980s, working on climate change. And it was out of that work that I realized I have to deal with the fact that people don't want the truth in most situations. It would be a romantic notion to think that I am providing the truth to people who really want to know it. Well, there are people who really want to know it, but it depends on what their living is. You guys are working in academics, which is one of the rare places where one can afford to spend some time seeking out the truth. One can engage in what Russell called a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. I think of humans as having to adapt to three environments at once. Reality, that is the physical world, which if you cross it, you will die. Society, which if you cross it, you will be in trouble. And the most immediate and most important environment that we're adapting to is ourselves. We seek comfort in our own skin. We do not look at ideas on a level playing field and evaluate them on whether they're realistic. We can't afford to. Our bodies are involved in it. Our emotions are involved. So we are very prone, all humans are very prone to deflect what is going to feel demotivating, what is going to feel agitating to us. We are doubt-avoiding creatures. We shouldn't be. If we could design us, we would make us more robotic. We would just be out investigating what's true for our own survival. But I do have to pay attention to the way that emotions, I would say it this way, language makes us a very anxious creature and provides us many ways in which we can escape our anxiety by delusion. And this is just the nature of human beings. This would be true, I'll argue, for any intelligent life form anywhere in the universe, if by intelligent we mean language using. All language using in organisms would have this problem. They're exposed to way too much world and given way too many ways to pretend that it's not real, that their fantasy, their ideal, their escapism is more real than reality. So, for example, if humans were to go extinct within the next 10,000 years, the human experiment, the experiment with language on the earth, would have lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds. If you crunch the whole universe's history into 1 year, the human experiment would have lasted 3 seconds. And I attribute a lot of the fragility of humankind, the Anthropocene, to the fact that we have language and also technology. But I would also say that I think that climate change and climate change denial has probably happened many times in the universe already, because organisms with language would be late evolving. There would be fossil fuels in some form or another. And since they have language, they would deny the peril that is caused by the rapid burning of those fossil fuels. So this is the human condition. You could say it's the symbolic species condition. But what I want to point out, what I'm trying to get across here, is that we have to, in agnotology, we have to address the human appetite for ignorance, that we as the receivers would not just be wanting the truth. It's very disappointing to have to face that, but I think it's important. I hope that got across. I hope my English is clear enough. I know it could be difficult.
Definitely.
Yeah. Coming to the question raised by Imran Kadri, SK Imran Kadri.
Yes.
He asks, sir, what should you do to the people who are creating the myths, which leads to ignorance of truth and living with myths as a social activist, when they have millions and millions of followers?
Right. So this is, let's see, what do you do about leaders who have millions of followers? Is that the question? I'm trying to understand the question. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes. So I have an approach that's a little different about this, because I have found that the other approach, first of all, I think it's the hardest question of all. How do you humbly humble people who will say or do anything to avoid humility? So what I'm saying is they have to be humbled into their human state, that they are infallible. I mean, that they are fallible, that they can make mistakes. And you have to do that without pretending that you are the authority. So, for example, to call someone a leader like you're describing arrogant is also its own form of arrogance. That is, to call anyone arrogant, or to call anybody arrogant is to claim that you are the authority on who is arrogant. So this is a real challenge, and I think it's the most fundamental question in moral philosophy, and I do have a different approach to it. You do not address the arguments they make. I think you cannot address the arguments that are made by the kinds of leaders you're talking about. If you do that, they win. See, they are not actually playing at the level of truth and falsity. They are playing for frame dominance. As long as they get to control what you two are talking about or what you debate with them, As long as they make you have to follow their lead on what gets talked about, they win power. They look powerful to followers. So my approach is you have to call them on the game they're playing, basically on the wild card, trump card formula, and you stick with this. And by the way, I have found that it has been useful. This is actually something that works. So if I get in a debate with someone, and I'm going to set aside whether they're more powerful than me for the moment. I'm just going to talk about the easy case. The easy case is when you're dealing with someone who is basically a peer, but is not acting like a peer. They are acting like they're the authority. If you're dealing with someone like that, what you do over and over, speaking to an audience, is you say, this person will say or do anything to feel heroic. And the reason you say that, and you ignore when they say, yeah, but what about this important issue? They don't actually care about the issues. They don't actually care about what they claim to care about most of all. But if you keep on saying, this person will say or do anything to avoid feeling human, to feel heroic, to feel like God, what they will do in response will confirm your accusation. Everything, they only do that. They only engage in spin and frame dominance. And as a result, they don't have to think. They don't have to pay attention to the meaning of their words. So if you try to track them down the way you would, for example, in a debate with a fellow intellectual or an academic, you will lose. Because all they're trying to do is maintain that godlike appearance. That's all Trump does. Donald Trump, if you look at Donald Trump, he doesn't care about any policy. None of that matters to him. He is, you could mistake Hitler for a Nazi. You could mistake Stalin for a communist. It's hard to mistake Trump for anything but someone who will say or do anything to feel heroic. So my best technique for attacking such people and crippling them, and this is borne out in history, the times when big leaders have been taken down has been when they were confronted to their face about how they will say or do anything to avoid appearing human. That, they will play God. So that is my best strategy. Will it always work? Is it a formula that's a surefire solution? Far from it. I do not assume that there is a way to take down these powerful people. In the United States, we had slavery for 12 generations. There is no guarantee. I am just looking for the best ways possible, and I would suggest that the one I just mentioned, where you do not pay attention to their arguments. You ignore their arguments. Their arguments are not relevant to them, and so they shouldn't be to you. Instead, you pay attention to how they will say or do anything to feel heroic. And you do that over and over. That's my best guess so far.
Yeah. When we talk of this is a planetary world, the new concept we are using nowadays. In this planetary world, the director, Dr. Bikram Jena, he is confronting with two ideas, that is role of academia versus true leadership in this current crisis of agrontological context. So he has raised three questions, just combined three questions I asked you. That is the role of academia and intellectuals for 21st century's life world. How you perceive these social issues at university level. And another, he asked about the leadership. Who is a real leader? Who leads or who win election? And to supplement this, he raises the issue of democracy. Democracy, whether democracy means electoral autocracy. What do you observe in the saga of ignorance in climatic change and crisis of humanity. So this is from the director, Dr. Vikram Jena.
Okay, let's see. Autocracy. I'm just reading the question. What do you observe? I'm not sure I understand it, but I'll answer briefly because first of all, because I want to make sure to get to any questions anyone has, and also because I want to make sure I understand the question. So this is one of the challenges with democracy that was noticed even by Plato, that in a way, Plato was an agnotologist in his recognition that democracies are very fragile because the people are easily flattered and pandered to. I was in China 4 years ago, and Donald Trump had just won the election, and I found myself admiring benevolent dictators. I do not think that she is a benevolent dictator, but I could certainly see after the United States had just voted in Donald Trump, which I would argue is the worst possible president. You couldn't pick a worse president for actual survival and thriving of a nation. But after that, I was thinking, yeah, this is, all life long I have been championing democracy. Now I recognize the problems with democracy, not that the alternative is better. That is, a benevolent dictator can become a malevolent dictator, and there's nothing left to stop them. So actually, I do not find any of the systems workable, and Plato's solution to it, the philosopher king, is very unworkable. Every tyrant in history has pretended they were the philosopher king. I don't see an obvious solution here. And when you're talking about a nation like India, where you have millions of followers and they are education deprived, that is, you have a long history in your country, as we do by now in the United States, a younger history, but a long history of not studying, not cultivating among large swaths of the population, not having much education. So we have that problem in the United States. And I mean no disrespect. I'm simply saying that in any nation that is education deprived, where there's not a lot of investment in education for everyone, then you end up with real problems, as we have in the United States. And what do I consider to be the fundamental education to avoid the problems of agnotology? It's rhetoric, critical thinking, and how to employ them both even-handedly. So how to apply critical thinking to your own assumptions and how to be able to make your opponent's case for them. That to be able to pretend you are the lawyer for your opponents, I think is a central part of how you cultivate an ability to spin or to make a strong case and at the same time not be persuaded by strong cases. Make a strong rhetorical case and not be persuaded by rhetoric. This is based on the trivium, which was a solution to agnotology in the Renaissance. The trivium was the liberal arts education, which was logic, rhetoric, and grammar back in the Middle Ages. And I'm saying it's actually logic, rhetoric, and how to employ both of them even-handedly. How to spin, how to unspin, and how to do both even-handedly. And did I answer the question briefly? No, I did not. I failed. Sorry. But that would be part of my answer. And I'm saying it's extremely difficult. This is why it's important to get prevention of these problems before they get out of hand. They're very out of hand in the United States right now. I'm guessing they're also very out of hand in India right now.
Yeah, one more question from Dr. Chandan Prasad. He asks that ignorance is the originate or the forefather of all civilized system of the whole world,
Mhm.
till social transformer or new paradigm introduced. I mean, he tries to know about the what kind of ignorance is the mother of ideas we continue to exist in, and if there was no ignorance, we may not have ideas to explore or transform our life. So how it is related to agnotological context?
Yes, I'm not. I'm looking for. Can you tell me what the first words are on this comment on the chat, so I can look up the question to see it? Is it? What are the first words in this submission? In this comment, so I can look for it here. I'm looking at the list here. I just want to understand the question. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just. What is which?
Can you clarify something regarding agrontological context? He wants to know.
Yes. Yeah. I'm looking for it on the list here. But anyway, yes. So you could say that agnotology has two remits, two programs. One is it is dealing with the propagandists in large institutions, whether they be government or profitable institutions. That is the traditional topic in agnotology. And I am suggesting with this term brain laundering that every individual wants to be purged of inconvenient truths. We would all be like that. That is a fundamental thing about humans. So if there's anything to take away, it's that with language, humans are exposed to way more things to worry about, real and fantastic, real and imaginary things to worry about, and that we would want to treat real threats as imaginary threats. That's what we would do. That's what humans would do. So agnotology is taking on a bigger question than just the powers that be pushing for ignorance. It's taking on, it also has the burden of dealing with the fact that people are very ambivalent about the truth. We want truths that flatter us, and we avoid truths that don't flatter us. We don't want to find out, for example, that we have a whole lot more work to do than we thought we did. It's very disappointing to find out the truth. For example, you see this in your students. A student who comes in and thinks that they're smarter than they, or more educated than they already are. And if you let them know with a bad grade that they didn't actually do as well as they did, you see the response. You see how a human, an individual, will come up with reasons why it's unfair, you're not right, the paper is better than it thought. Now, you may have less of this problem in India than we do here, because students in India are probably more respectful of their professors than they are here. But here you find students are ready to argue that if it's disappointing to me, it must be false. This is something in humans that agnotology must address.
Yeah. One more question, interesting question is coming from Kadri. That is related. What is your ideas relating to myth, truth, and social change?
Well, so I have taught history, college level history, and one of the big questions you deal with is, do ideas make a difference in history? This is a standard question when you're teaching. And here's my guess at it. Yes, ideas make a difference, but mostly the ideas that either yield you a new technology, those ideas certainly make a difference, but also ideas that enable a group, a tribe, a population, to proudly declare we deserve more. That is, the ideas that have made the biggest difference are ones that have galvanized or brought together a whole group of people to say we deserve more, to proudly say we deserve more. Now, if you look at it, the worst movements in world history were motivated by that. People coming together, proudly declaring we deserve more. And the best movements in world history have been the product of people coming together to declare we deserve more. So what's the difference between those two? How can you tell whether a movement that is proudly saying we deserve more is going to be a good movement or a bad movement? It's difficult, but I would say part of it is whether they're saying we deserve equal or whether they're saying we deserve more than the others. And what we find in the world, and I think you've got a case of that going on here in India as well, is that a movement that has been oppressed for a long time will often shout, we deserve more, and sooner or later, the movement will bend towards away from we deserve equal to we deserve more. At least that is often the case. That we have to pay very close attention to that line. When are you saying, because we have been oppressed, we deserve equal now, or because we have been oppressed, we deserve more? I actually think that there's a lot to be said for affirmative action, for giving more to people who have been oppressed for a long time, but it's also a touchy line. And basically what I'm saying is the world is crowded and the lines between our properties are not demarcated. We only have historical lines that have been drawn in the past, and they are not drawn fairly at all. But if we're going to be trying to redraw the lines, we have to deal with the fact that everybody wants more space. Everybody wants more resources. We're trying to figure out when to tuck in our elbows and when to jut out our elbows. But I would say that the one thing we have to take on is that given human appetites, the desire to say a proud, I deserve more, would be a very big motivator for all humans. The ability to say, wait, I have been treated unfairly, I deserve more. That is a strong human appetite.
Yeah. Can I ask a question if your time permits?
Yes, I'm fine. Yes.
Yeah. Sir, when history writing was started by man, it was written in different forms all over the world. When we look at the history of China, the Chinese people wrote their history in the forms of annals. When we look at the Indians, ancient Indians, they started writing their history in the forms of Puranas, in
Yes.
poetic forms.
Mhm.
These poetic forms was being loved by the people of India. They were keeping these scriptures and they were reading these all through their life. So this is being considered history in India. So
Mhm.
when we talk of history writing in Greece, Herodotus started in the writing in the form of narratives. So uh, I agree with you, sir. In history writing, there must be evidence and empirical evidence with narratives. But what is your ideas regarding the different forms of history writing? Can you say, can the European historians claim that the Indian Puranas are based on myths?
Great question. Great question. How does an idea end up with millions of followers? Again, I come back to three adaptive realms for humans. We have to adapt to physical reality, we have to adapt to social reality, and we have to have comfort in our own skins. The one that feels most immediate and pressing is comfort in our own skins. Everybody here knows what it's like to get disappointing news and their body responds immediately, and it is not welcome. So that feels the most immediate and most pressing. In the long term, what matters most is getting along with physical reality. That is, that a society agrees with itself and lives in harmony is not a guarantee that it will survive. We don't just have to get along with each other, we have to get along with physical reality. So any kind of writing, any kind of, whether it be annals or narratives or philosophical tracts, in a way, the dialogues, Plato's dialogues are a kind of narrative, in a way, but Christianity is certainly a narrative. Notice that that's a social construct, and a society both represents, the social is the intermediary between reality and personal appetite. So we know that a culture, we know that our parents can give us reality checks. When we are young, they are representing reality to us. They're telling us to be careful when we cross the street because they know that in physical reality we could die. But at the same time, one can end up in a family which is living a myth, is being unrealistic. One can end up in a culture that panders, that flatters. This is what we've got in the United States right now, is we had a president recently who flattered people and made them feel like they were gods, or like they were aligned with God. So they were humble before God, and therefore they could play the God over everybody in the United States. That's what we're getting with Christianity right now. Now, how can we say what's myth and what isn't? In a way, that's the scientific research question. I do a lot of work in philosophy of science, and I think that Originism is part of it. If we have an accurate explanation for how something emerges, we'll have a better idea of what it is. But I also want to get back to my point about optimal illusion. I love fiction. I need fiction. And when I am, let's say, watching fiction on TV, I believe it is true, but I know it's not true. So I begin to make a distinction between belief and relief. So I could say, I believe in science, but I relieve in theology. I believe in science, but I relieve in religion. I think we have to get better at admitting we need both, that no one is a perfect realist, that we actually need fiction in order to survive. Entertainment is not just an option, it's a human necessity. It's too anxious. To be human is to be too anxious. This is the problem with language. We need to take flights of fantasy. And we can learn great wisdom from fantasy. But I would also argue that it's not exclusive to one religion or another, or to religion itself. That is, I am in the business of trying to demote religion to the elevated status at which I hold all forms of escapism. That is, one can gain wisdom from a summer blockbuster movie. One can gain wisdom from a pantheistic blockbuster movie like any of the ones being made by Marvel Comics these days. Those are pantheistic myths. And you can gain wisdom from them. You can also gain garbage from them. The members of ISIS watch Hollywood movies and think that they're the heroes of the Hollywood movies. This is one of the problems with narratives. Fictional narratives they free the viewer or audience to identify with whomever they want. this is one of the challenges in fiction. So we know that fiction arises, the first fictional stories, from what I understand, there may be Upanishads, there may be Indian fiction that precedes this. I'm not talking about who has primacy, but Aesop's fables were fables that a noble told to a king as a way to teach lessons, but avoid being too direct with the king. So that is the advantage of narrative. That is one of the advantages of narrative, is it feels very visceral, and you're not threatening people with direct comments about their own behavior. You leave it up to the individual to draw what lessons they can from it. So I think there's room for narrative. I think there's room for myth, but I do think we have to get better at distinguishing between fact and fiction. And we need both. And we can, and I do think that we can wholeheartedly believe fictions and know they're not true. I think that's what we do when we're watching a movie. When I'm watching a movie, I think I'm the hero in the movie. I think I'm like a god. But if you tap me on the shoulder and asked, is this movie real? No, of course it's not real. So I believe in the movie, but I relieve in the movie, but I believe in reality, is how I think about it.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Now I request Shravan Kumar Bag to have a concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, audible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Das. Well, at the outset, let me to take this opportunity to express a deep sense of gratitude and propose a vote of thanks to Professor Sherman for delivering, rather I would say, for lightning to many of us with the concept of econtology. So it was one of the much appreciated and relevant talk in this series of talk that we have organized, and your narration with the process of pedagogy, particularly when I see the kind of spin dominance and meme that you talked about, this technique have really taken this entire discourse to a next level. And the words like brain laundry, brainwash, and and different other words like the concept of reality, society, self, and most particularly I would say the human appetite for ignorance are the key takeaways. And I'm sure that all the participants must have been realized, and they must start taking this in their professional and personal life. When I see the entire discourse that you have given, sir, one of the very key finding, or I would say one of the key takeaway from your deliberation is the statement that you said, sir, that the skill of ability to differentiate is the need of the hour, and which is very pertinent. It is a global phenomenon right now, and of course, above all, the theme that you said, that we all need fiction and non-fiction, and that's why we all are humans, which is very pertinent, sir. Thank you so much for putting all those things in a very nutshell and very crispy manner to enlighten all of us. And I'm sure that it will be very much useful in our personal and professional sphere. And the purpose of this dialogue would be served when we make those things practical in our every sphere of life. At the same time, I will also take this opportunity to thank our mentors, our advisors, who have given their valuable insight, their suggestions from time to time to initiate this process of dialogue at a scale. Sir, your cooperation, your insight have set this forum to a next level, and we continue to seek your support and mentorship like this. Last but not the least, let me to pay a deep sense of thanks to all our participants for their active participation and contribution, for making this entire discourse a meaningful event. Last but not the least, as I said, that card is very much committed to steer the process of development through such kind of discourse and such kind of dialogue. And we look forward for all of your cooperation and a meaningful engagement in near future. Thank you so much, Dr. Das, Card, and of course, Professor Sherman, for giving us such a very, I would say, food for thought. Of course, this is almost night in India, and we are far from there. But I'm sure that all the participants must have taken this, and they will go with this with a present dream to start a new day tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.